My name is Barbara Norton. I'm 65 years old, a retired school teacher. At my daughter's funeral, her husband insisted the coffin be sealed shut because of a serious accident. He stood there, arms crossed, telling everyone it was too gruesome to see. No one questioned him. At the cemetery, right as they lowered the coffin into the ground, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I pulled it out and the words hit me like a hammer. Mom, I'm alive. The person in the coffin isn't me. My fingers shook as I typed back fast, asking where she was. The reply came almost instantly. I can't say right now. They're watching. Then the final line that turned my blood cold. Don't trust your son-in-law. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The same man who had just demanded that coffin stay sealed was the one my daughter was warning me about. It made no sense, yet it made every piece click into place in the worst way possible. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, kept my face calm for the last few seconds of the service, then walked straight to my car and drove away. The road back to my old house deep in the rural Minnesota woods stretched ahead, but my mind was already racing far ahead of it. This was no ordinary funeral. It was the start of something much darker, and I knew I had to figure it out before it swallowed me whole. If this story has you hooked, already hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel for more intense family drama stories, and drop a comment below. What would you do if you received a text like that from your own child at their funeral? Your support keeps these stories coming. The drive home felt endless that afternoon. I kept both hands firm on the steering wheel as the gravel road continued to curve through the dense woods. Each familiar bend brought me closer to the old wooden house that had served as my steady anchor for so many years in rural Minnesota. That house held countless memories from the time my husband left without any explanation, forcing me to raise Denise and Keith entirely on my own. For 30 long years, I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, returning home every evening exhausted but determined to keep the family going. I would sit at the kitchen table correcting stacks of student papers while preparing basic meals that stretched our limited budget as far as possible. Denise, even when she was still a teenager, often sat right beside me, offering help with Keith's homework assignments. She handled the extra chores around the house without ever voicing a single complaint, no matter how many bills accumulated on the counter or how little money remained after paying the essentials. Her quiet support made those difficult years more bearable for all of us. 5 years earlier, Denise had first introduced me to Ryan Callahan when she brought him to the house. He walked through the front door carrying a confident smile and immediately launched into detailed stories about his experiences in sales work. They had first met at a modest community gathering held in the town a short distance away, and their relationship developed rapidly from that initial encounter. After dating for just 1 year, they decided to marry in a straightforward ceremony at the county courthouse with only a judge present. Denise gathered her belongings and relocated to a modest apartment with him, but she made sure to drive back to visit me every weekend without fail. In those early days, Ryan came across as a dependable and steady partner. He would join our family meals on Sundays and share his thoughts about creating a more secure future for everyone involved. His words always sounded practical and well considered, and I observed how Denise's expression brightened noticeably whenever he discussed the life they hoped to create together. Over time, the nature of our conversations began to change in subtle ways. Ryan gradually started mentioning various investment possibilities that carried the promise of rapid financial growth. One particular evening, Denise telephoned me from their apartment, her voice filled with clear excitement as she described the cryptocurrency opportunity that Ryan had discovered through his professional contacts. She went into considerable detail about the digital currency transactions and the related real estate project that appeared to guarantee strong returns in a relatively short period. Ryan had already invested a portion of their available savings and strongly encouraged her to contribute additional funds as well. I paid close attention to every word she spoke, carefully raising questions about the potential risks and the need for thorough verification. Something about the entire arrangement struck me as questionable based on my long experience. Throughout my teaching career, I had seen numerous families suffer significant losses after pursuing opportunities that seemed flawless when presented on paper. I offered my advice gently, suggesting that Denise proceed with caution and confirm all the claims independently. She responded by setting aside my worries, assuring me that Ryan had conducted extensive research and that the individuals involved were reliable professionals with solid reputations. Her belief in his judgment appeared to strengthen steadily with each passing month. During the next 12 months, her regular weekend visits to the house became noticeably less frequent. She began relying more on telephone calls to share the latest developments regarding the increasing value shown in their cryptocurrency accounts and the ongoing advancement of the property project. Ryan himself started appearing at the house on his own with greater regularity. He would take a seat across from me at the kitchen table and explain at length how these particular investments held the potential to provide advantages for the whole family in the long run. He outlined various options, including making improvements to the existing land or utilizing sections of it to facilitate even larger financial steps. I could clearly detect the hopeful tone in Denise's voice on those occasions when she spoke about the plans she and Ryan were pursuing together. Yet my personal instincts continued to signal the importance of remaining watchful. One afternoon, when Ryan stopped by without Denise present, I questioned him directly for more specific details about the arrangements. He provided only broad responses and promptly shifted the topic to something unrelated. Approximately 6 months ago, the intensity of his request became much more evident. Ryan took his usual place at the kitchen table and presented his arguments with renewed emphasis. He explained that the investment group now required additional collateral in order to complete a significant transaction that was already in progress. He suggested including my house, along with the surrounding acreage, as part of the asset package they needed to secure. The manner in which he described the request made it sound like an ordinary procedural matter that would ultimately protect the interests of all parties involved. I refused the idea right away, pointing out that the property stood as my sole source of security for retirement after decades spent working steadily and saving with great care. He chose not to press the point during that particular visit, but the same topic continued to surface repeatedly in the conversations that followed. One afternoon, Ryan arrived at the house without any prior notice, bringing along several additional sets of documents. He went over the proposed conditions once more, placing special emphasis on the possible benefits and the level of protection the arrangement was intended to deliver. I remained seated and listened without interruption, absorbing everything he said while my mind worked through layers of growing doubt. I had always approached financial decisions with a high degree of discipline and foresight, and this latest proposal clearly crossed a boundary I was not prepared to accept. I informed him that I would require several days to review all the materials thoroughly before reaching any conclusion. The look that crossed his face revealed that he had anticipated a more favorable response and had little intention of allowing the matter to rest. Later during that same evening, my phone received yet another incoming message. This time, the text originated from Denise. Its concise content directly confirmed the concerns that had been accumulating within me for some time. Ryan had become deeply involved in the investment activity and currently carried a debt amounting to $2 million. He was actively exploring different methods to address and resolve that obligation. The language used was direct and left little room for misinterpretation, alerting me to the possibility that Ryan's increasing desperation could prompt him to consider drastic actions. I reviewed the message multiple times, sensing a substantial burden settle heavily upon me as various separate elements began to align in my understanding. The individual who had recently occupied the chair at my table while advocating strongly for the use of the land was now the very person my daughter felt necessary to caution me against using discreet communications. I placed the phone down on the table and stayed seated within the quiet surroundings of my kitchen. The circumstances had evidently progressed well beyond any ordinary family disagreement. The issues at stake carried considerably higher consequences, and I recognized that whatever steps I chose to take would require the utmost care if I wished to protect the remaining stability of our lives. A few days later, I made my decision. I sent a careful reply to the latest message and suggested a meeting at the old cabin we used to visit years ago for weekend trips. The location sat deep among the pines, several miles from the main house along a narrow dirt track that few people knew about. Denise confirmed the time with a single short response. I left the house early the next morning, taking only a small bag and making sure no one followed me from the road. The drive gave me time to think through everything that had happened since the funeral and to prepare the questions I needed to ask her about the full picture. I wanted to understand exactly how deep the trouble went, what specific steps they had taken, and what realistic options we actually had moving forward without making any sudden moves that could put her in greater danger. When I arrived at the cabin, the door was already unlocked. Denise stepped out from the shadowed interior looking thinner than the last time I had seen her and wearing clothes that did not match her usual style. She closed the door quickly behind me and checked the windows before speaking. Her voice stayed low as she explained the full extent of the situation. Ryan Callahan had convinced her to invest heavily in a cryptocurrency scheme connected to a fake real estate development. The group behind it included a man with silver hair who handled the financial side, and another partner who managed the supposed property deals. Together, they had created documents that appeared legitimate but were designed to move money through multiple accounts in order to hide the true flow of funds. Denise described how Ryan had gradually increased the amounts until their joint savings were gone and they had borrowed against credit lines. When the investment stopped showing returns, he began talking about using my property as additional security. She admitted she had signed papers without reading every line because she trusted her husband completely at that point in their marriage. Only later did she discover the total debt had reached $2 million. The group then proposed a solution involving a staged car accident that would trigger her life insurance policy for the full amount. Ryan had even shown her altered documents that listed her as the primary insured, with the payout directed to him as beneficiary. She told me about the specific evening when Ryan had left the papers out on the table while he took a phone call in the other room. That was the moment she realized the scale of what they were planning and how far he was willing to go. I listened without interrupting while she laid out the timeline of meetings and phone calls she had overheard. The silver-haired man had visited their apartment twice, speaking openly about timing the incident during a planned drive on a remote stretch of highway. Ryan had agreed to the plan and started preparing the vehicle with mechanical changes that would look like an ordinary failure. Denise realized the danger when she found copies of the insurance forms hidden in Ryan's briefcase. She managed to slip away during a trip to the store and had been staying in different locations ever since, using cash and avoiding any traceable activity. She explained how she had changed her appearance slightly and paid for everything in cash to stay off any digital records that could lead them back to her. She looked directly at me and said she needed my help to stop them before Ryan carried out the next step. I told her I would stand with her and that we would handle this together without rushing into anything visible. We spent the next hour going over possible steps, focusing on ways to gather evidence while keeping her location unknown. Denise provided specific names and dates she remembered from the conversations. I noted everything in a small notebook I had brought, making sure the details stayed clear in my mind. We discussed how to create a paper trail that would show the investments as fraudulent without putting her at further risk. I asked her to recall every conversation she had witnessed between Ryan and the other men, including any mention of the insurance payout or the use of my land. She answered each question carefully, adding small details that helped paint a clearer picture of their intentions. She remembered one phone call where Ryan had laughed about how easy it would be to make everything look like a tragic accident and how quickly the insurance company would pay out once the report was filed. Before we finished the discussion, my phone rang. It was Keith Norton calling to check if I had returned home safely after the funeral. His voice carried genuine concern as he asked how I was holding up and whether I needed anything from town. I kept my tone steady and answered that I was managing but would appreciate if he stopped by the house later in the week. Keith agreed without hesitation and mentioned he had noticed Ryan acting strangely at the service. I did not share any details yet, but the call confirmed my growing thought that my son could provide quiet support if the situation required more hands. I ended the call quickly so Denise would not feel exposed during our conversation. Denise and I agreed on the next contact method, using a new messaging app with disappearing messages. She emphasized the need to move slowly and avoid any direct confrontation that might alert Ryan or his partners. We reviewed the plan one final time, making sure each step aligned with keeping her safe while building the case against them. She suggested I start by contacting my old student who had become a lawyer to get professional advice on how to document everything properly without raising suspicion. I left the cabin first, driving back along the same quiet track while thinking through the information she had given me. The weight of what I now knew settled firmly in my chest, but I also felt a clear sense of purpose forming. Protecting my daughter meant acting with patience and precision, and I intended to do exactly that. The next morning brought an unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find Ryan Callahan standing on the porch with two other men I had never seen before. One had a stocky build and short cropped hair, while the other wore a dark jacket and kept his hands in his pockets. Ryan did not waste time with greetings. He stepped inside without being invited and told me the investment group needed the paperwork signed today so they could move forward with the collateral arrangement. The two men followed him in and positioned themselves near the living room entrance as if to block any quick exit. Ryan placed a thick folder on the kitchen table and opened it to the pages that required my signature. He explained again that this step would secure the entire deal and protect the family from any financial fallout. His tone sounded urgent but controlled as he pointed to the lines where I was supposed to sign. He added that the partners had set a strict deadline and any hesitation could lead to problems for everyone involved. I sat down at the table and looked over the documents carefully while my mind raced for a way to buy time. The papers listed my house and the surrounding land as security for a loan connected to the cryptocurrency project. Ryan leaned closer and said the group was waiting for confirmation and could not delay any longer. The stocky man shifted his weight and muttered something about getting this done quickly. I kept my expression neutral and asked a few clarifying questions about the terms to slow things down. I inquired about the exact interest rate and the conditions for releasing the collateral once the deal closed. Ryan answered each one with growing impatience but tried to maintain a calm front. He repeated that everything was standard procedure and there was no need for extra questions at this stage. Just as I picked up the pen to pretend I was considering the signature, the front door opened again. Keith Norton walked in carrying a bag of groceries he had picked up for me. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the three men and immediately sensed the tension in the room. Keith set the bag down and asked what was going on. Ryan turned toward him and said this was a private family matter that did not concern him. Keith ignored the comment and moved closer to the table, asking why these strangers were in the house and what papers I was being asked to sign. The atmosphere shifted quickly as Ryan repeated that the documents were necessary for the investment and that everyone would benefit if I signed right away. Keith picked up one of the pages and scanned it before looking directly at Ryan. He questioned the legitimacy of the deal and asked why such a large amount of collateral was needed for a cryptocurrency project. Ryan's face tightened and he told Keith to stay out of it since he did not understand the business side. The man in the dark jacket stepped forward and suggested that Keith leave so we could finish the discussion. Keith refused and raised his voice, saying he would not let anyone pressure his mother into signing anything without proper legal review. The argument escalated as Ryan accused Keith of interfering in matters that were none of his concern and claimed the delay could cause the entire deal to collapse. Keith fired back that the real collapse would happen if I lost the only home I had left after years of hard work. He pointed out that the land had been in the family for decades and should not be risked on something that looked risky from the start. I watched the exchange without speaking at first, letting the confrontation play out to create more time. Ryan's frustration became obvious as he slammed his hand on the table and demanded that I sign immediately. The two men with him exchanged glances, and the stocky one moved slightly closer to Keith as if to intimidate him. Keith stood his ground and told Ryan that if the deal was legitimate, there was no reason it could not wait a few more days for a lawyer to look at the papers. Ryan laughed bitterly and said there was no time left because the partners were already threatening consequences if the collateral was not secured. He mentioned that the group had other options and would not hesitate to use them if necessary. During a brief pause in the shouting, I quietly sent a coded message to Denise using the app we had agreed upon. I described the situation in short terms and asked for guidance on how to handle the immediate pressure. Her reply came within minutes, instructing me to agree in principle but insist on reviewing the final version with a lawyer before any actual signature. She also suggested I mention the need for an official appraisal of the land to further delay the process. I followed her instructions and told Ryan that I was willing to consider the arrangement, but only after the property was properly appraised and a lawyer confirmed the terms. Ryan argued against the extra steps, but the presence of Keith made it harder for him to push too aggressively. He tried to negotiate a shorter timeline, but Keith kept pressing for full transparency. The two men grew restless, and the one in the dark jacket whispered something to Ryan. Ryan finally agreed to give me until the end of the week, but warned that any further delay would have serious repercussions for the family. He gathered the documents and motioned for the other two to leave with him. As they walked out, Ryan shot a hard look at Keith and said this was not over. Keith waited until their car had driven away before turning to me and asking what was really happening. I told him I would explain everything soon, but for now we needed to stay careful and not give Ryan any reason to suspect we were working against him. Keith helped me put away the groceries and stayed for a while longer discussing how to handle the next visit if Ryan returned. He offered to stay at the house for the next few days if needed. The confrontation had bought us valuable time, but it had also shown how determined Ryan and his partners were to secure the land. I knew the coming days would require even more caution as we built the evidence we needed. Later that same afternoon, I picked up the phone. I dialed the number for Michael Donovan, my former student who had become a practicing lawyer in the nearby town. Michael had been one of my best students years ago, and we had stayed in touch after he graduated from law school. He answered on the second ring and sounded surprised but pleased to hear from me. I told him I needed to meet as soon as possible about a serious family matter involving legal documents and potential fraud. Michael did not ask for details over the phone and suggested we meet at his small office the following morning. I agreed and hung up, feeling a slight sense of relief that someone with professional knowledge was now involved in the situation and could help guide the next steps without unnecessary risks. The next morning, I drove to the town and found Michael's office on a quiet street lined with older buildings. He greeted me at the door with a warm handshake and led me into a modest conference room. I sat down and began explaining the situation from the beginning without leaving out any important facts. I described the cryptocurrency investments Ryan had pushed Denise into and the mounting debt that now stood at $2 million. I told him about the pressure to use my house and land as collateral and the confrontation that had happened the day before with Ryan and the two other men. Michael listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions about the documents Ryan had presented and the exact wording used in those papers. He wanted to know the specific language regarding the collateral and any references to the investment returns or the insurance policy. When I finished the initial summary, Michael leaned back in his chair and said the pattern sounded like a classic case of investment fraud, combined with an attempt to seize assets through deceptive means. He explained that creating fake cryptocurrency and real estate deals to extract money, and then using family property as security, was a common tactic in such schemes. Michael suggested we could turn the situation around by preparing our own set of documents that would appear to cooperate but actually create a legal trap. He proposed drafting a counter agreement that would document the transfer of the land in a way that required full disclosure of all investment details and included clauses that would expose any fraudulent activity if the deal proceeded. We spent the next 2 hours working on the language for the new contract. Michael drafted sections that required Ryan and his partners to provide complete financial records of the cryptocurrency transactions before any collateral could be finalized. He included provisions for an independent audit and penalties for any misrepresentation. I reviewed each paragraph carefully, suggesting small changes to make the wording sound more like something I would naturally agree to under pressure. Michael also added a clause about the life insurance policy that would force any claim to be thoroughly investigated if certain conditions were met. The goal was to make the document tempting enough for Ryan to sign while building an ironclad record of his knowledge and intent. We went through each section multiple times, adjusting the phrasing to balance cooperation with protection and to ensure the contract would hold up in court if needed. During a short break, Keith arrived at the office after I had texted him the address. He brought a small box containing old phones and papers that Denise had left with him months earlier. Keith explained that he had gone through the items carefully and found several text messages and screenshots showing conversations between Ryan and the silver-haired man. The messages discussed specific amounts transferred and references to the staged incident. Michael examined the materials and said they could serve as strong supporting evidence if handled properly through legal channels. Keith offered to organize the items chronologically and make secure copies so nothing would be lost. He also mentioned finding additional notes that referenced meetings with the second partner and specific dates when the insurance documents were discussed. Michael and I continued refining the contract for another hour, making sure every clause aligned with the evidence we were gathering. He emphasized the importance of keeping the plan quiet and not confronting Ryan directly until the right moment. We agreed that I would present the new document to Ryan as a revised version of the original proposal to make it seem like I was cooperating under pressure. Michael would prepare the necessary filings so that any signature on the contract could be used later in a formal complaint to authorities. He walked me through the potential timeline for submitting the evidence once the signatures were obtained and explained how the chain of custody for the documents would work. Before we wrapped up the meeting, Michael gave me clear instructions on how to record any future conversations with Ryan without breaking state laws. He also recommended that Keith stay close to the house for the next few days to provide additional presence if needed. I left the office with a copy of the draft contract and a clearer understanding of the legal path ahead. The plan was starting to take solid shape, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt we had a real chance to protect the family without direct confrontation. 2 days later, I sent the message. I contacted Ryan and told him I had reviewed the revised contract with my lawyer and was ready to sign if the terms were acceptable. I suggested we meet at the small diner along the forest road where we could talk quietly and finish the paperwork. Ryan agreed quickly and said he would bring his partners so everyone could be on the same page. I arrived early and chose a corner booth that offered some privacy while still allowing me to see the entrance. The diner was half full with locals having late lunch, and the smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. Ryan walked in first, followed by the silver-haired man and the one in the dark jacket. They sat down across from me, and Ryan immediately asked to see the new contract. I slid the folder across the table and explained that my lawyer had made a few adjustments to protect everyone involved. Ryan opened the folder and scanned the pages while the silver-haired man leaned in to read along. I watched their faces closely as they reached the sections requiring full financial disclosure and the independent audit. Ryan's expression remained focused, but I noticed a slight hesitation when he saw the clause about the insurance policy. I kept my voice steady and said the changes were reasonable given the size of the collateral, and that signing would allow the deal to move forward without further delays. Ryan asked a few questions about the audit requirement, and I answered that it was standard procedure for any large asset transfer. The silver-haired man nodded and said the group could provide the records once the collateral was secured. Ryan turned to his partners and they exchanged quiet words before he picked up the pen. He signed on the designated lines and passed the papers to the other two men, who also signed without much discussion. The tension in the booth was noticeable as Ryan pushed the folder back to me and said this should finally settle everything. I thanked them and mentioned that I would have my lawyer file the documents the next day. Ryan leaned forward and asked if there was any chance I would change my mind at the last minute. I shook my head and assured him the signature was final as long as the financial records were delivered as promised. The man in the dark jacket checked his watch and suggested they leave soon to meet another contact. Ryan stood up first and reminded me that the group expected quick action on the collateral transfer. I nodded and watched them walk out of the diner before I allowed myself a slow breath. Once they were gone, I took out the small recorder Michael had given me and stopped the recording. The device had captured every word of the conversation, including the references to the cryptocurrency deal and the collateral. I sent a short message to Michael confirming that the signatures were obtained and attached the audio file. Michael replied almost immediately, saying he would review everything and prepare the next steps for submission to the authorities. I paid for my coffee and left the diner, driving back toward the house with the signed contract safely in my bag. The meeting had gone exactly as planned, with Ryan and his partners signing the document that would later serve as key evidence against them. The high stakes of the moment had been clear in their hurried signatures and the way they pushed to finish quickly. I knew the trap was now set, and the next phase would depend on how carefully we handled the evidence. The following morning, I made the call. I contacted Sheriff Patrick Foley at the local station and asked if we could meet in person. He agreed and suggested I come to his office right away. When I arrived, he closed the door and listened as I laid out the entire situation, including the signed contract and the audio recording from the diner. I handed over the copies of the documents and the evidence Keith had organized. Sheriff Foley reviewed the materials carefully and said the case showed clear signs of organized fraud and attempted asset seizure. He contacted the federal authorities immediately, and within hours a team from the FBI arrived to take over the investigation. The agents asked detailed questions about the timeline and the roles of each person involved. I provided all the information I had gathered, including the messages from Denise and the supporting evidence from the old phones. The lead agent explained that they would move quickly to secure the location where Ryan and his group stored their records. They had already identified a warehouse on the outskirts of the forest area based on the details in the contract and the recorded conversation. Sheriff Foley coordinated with the state police to set up a perimeter while the FBI prepared for the raid. The team reviewed satellite images and confirmed the presence of vehicles matching the descriptions from the diner meeting. They planned the operation for that evening to catch the group while they were still handling documents. That evening, the operation began. I waited at the house with Keith while the agents moved in on the warehouse. The FBI team surrounded the building and entered after confirming the presence of Ryan and the two other men. The silver-haired man and the partner in the dark jacket were inside sorting through boxes of documents and computer equipment. Ryan was there directing the activity when the agents announced themselves. The group was taken into custody without resistance as the agents secured the evidence, including files that matched the fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme and the altered insurance papers. The agents seized computers, hard drives, and stacks of paperwork that contained the fake investment records. Sheriff Foley called me later that night to confirm that all three men had been arrested and the warehouse contents were being processed as evidence. He said the charges would include wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted grand theft. The signed contract and the recording would play a central role in building the case. I asked about Denise, and he assured me that her safety was being protected and that she would be contacted through secure channels once the immediate threat was neutralized. The sheriff also mentioned that the federal team was impressed with how the evidence had been collected and documented. I sent a brief message to Denise using the secure app to let her know the raid had succeeded and the men were in custody. Her reply came a short time later, confirming she had received the update and was safe. She thanked me for everything I had done and said she would stay hidden a little longer until the authorities confirmed it was clear. The message brought a wave of relief, but also a heavy realization of how close the family had come to losing everything through one person's betrayal. Keith stayed with me that night, and we talked about the next steps, including how the court process would unfold. The evidence collected was strong enough to move the case forward quickly, according to Sheriff Foley. For the first time in weeks, the immediate danger had passed, but the consequences of Ryan's actions were only beginning to unfold. I sat in the quiet house thinking about the years I had spent building a life for my children and how one marriage had nearly destroyed it all. Weeks later, the courtroom was quiet. I sat in the front row with Keith beside me as the judge reviewed the final evidence. Ryan Callahan stood with his lawyer while the federal prosecutor presented the case built from the signed contract, the audio recording, the warehouse documents, and the messages that proved the conspiracy. The silver haired man and the other partner had already accepted plea deals and testified against Ryan. The judge listened to the details of the $2 million fraud, the attempt to use my house as collateral, and the planned insurance scheme that would have left Denise presumed dead. When the sentencing came, the judge spoke clearly, stating that Ryan had betrayed his own family for financial gain and showed no remorse. He sentenced Ryan to 15 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages to the victims. Ryan would lose any claim to assets and face additional civil penalties that would follow him for years after release. I watched as Ryan was led away in handcuffs without looking back. There was no apology, no final word, only the cold reality of the consequences he had brought upon himself. After the hearing, I told the prosecutor I wanted no further contact with Ryan and that any attempts to reach me or my family would be reported immediately. The chapter with him was closed forever. The court also issued a restraining order preventing him from contacting any member of the family. Denise returned to the house a few days after the sentencing. She arrived quietly one afternoon carrying only a small bag and looking exhausted from the weeks in hiding. We sat at the kitchen table and she told me how the marriage had slowly changed once Ryan became obsessed with the investments. She admitted she had ignored the early warning signs because she wanted to believe in the future he promised. Now that future was gone and she had to start over. The house felt different with her back, but the trust that once held the family together had been shattered beyond repair. We spoke honestly about what had happened and agreed that things would never return to the way they were before. Denise decided to stay in the area but live separately for a while until she could rebuild her own life and find work again. Keith stayed at the house to help with daily matters and to make sure we were not alone during the adjustment period. He handled small repairs and made sure the property remained secure while we dealt with the legal paperwork for the restitution. The three of us spent quiet evenings talking about the past and what the future might look like now that the immediate threat was over. There were moments of silence where the weight of the betrayal hung in the air, but we chose not to pretend everything was fine. The family bond remained, but it was forever changed by the actions of one person who had chosen greed over loyalty. I stood on the porch one evening looking out at the tall pines surrounding the old house. The land that Ryan had tried to take was still mine, and the house that had sheltered my children through hard times was still standing. The experience taught me a hard lesson about trust and the dangers of blind loyalty within a family. When someone close to you chooses money and deception over the people who love them, the only wise choice is to protect yourself with clear boundaries and careful action. Love alone is not enough if it blinds you to the truth. From that day forward, I made sure to stay alert and to value actions over words. The betrayal had cost us time, money, and peace, but it had also shown the strength that comes from facing the truth together. Denise, Keith, and I would move forward separately, yet connected by the shared experience. The house in the Minnesota woods remained a place of quiet strength, a reminder that even after deep pain, a family can survive by choosing honesty and caution over blind trust. The consequences for Ryan were real and lasting. He would spend the next 15 years behind bars paying for what he had done while we rebuilt our lives without him. That was the end of the story. No forgiveness, no second chances, only the clear decision to move on and protect what was left of our family.